Okay, welcome to Podline.
Take two. Welcome to LEAFline, as Pastor Tim used to call it. Welcome to LEAFline, our
Welcome to the
weekly
Leaf Brief
podcast to try to connect with you as best we can over this lovely medium called podcasting. So thank you for joining us. Welcome in. I'm Brian Rolston, assistant to the pastor. No,
And I'm not.
I'm associate to the pastor.
Oh, whoa.
Totally getting my titles mixed up. Jeez. Anyway, and that's Ben Aquina over there. He is director of many things, and we're glad you're joining us. So thank you. Hello.
Welcome to episode number 25 of LEAFline.
He keeps saying that, making me feel old every time, but that's okay. The pandemic's old too, but we're glad you're with us still.
This pandemic is so old.
It is so old.
It's so last season.
I'm so over it.
Can I get an update?
All right, so updates. We don't have much, but we want to let you know that we do have a few outdoor activities, children and youth related, have been canceled due to the air quality. Nothing relating to the pandemic, praise the Lord. So we have an attempt to try to get those back going at
They
some
are
point.
postponed for an indeterminate amount of time because we are constantly looking at the air quality index, and if a decision does get made about that evening's events, if if it's a Tuesday and you're not sure whether there's room for your teen here on campus, be checking your devices because our people will be putting it out on Facebook and I believe through the Remind app. So just stay tuned, I guess.
So we only tell you this because it continues to give us hope that someday there will be other outdoor features to tell you about. So stay tuned. Yes. Moving on.
Oh, and we got to talk about what happened on church
Not
campus
moving
on
on.
Sunday.
We have some past episode of the live stream adventures in live streaming with technological gremlins to tell you
If you were
about.
trying to watch the stream on Sunday, I imagine it was a very confusing experience. I hope it was not too frustrating at your end. It was very frustrating at our end. We definitely did our best, but if you only watched the disaster of a stream and did not stick around or check Facebook later that day, please go back to our YouTube account. It's also on the front page of our website. We did end up recording the entire service and uploading it as a separate video. Like I said, it's available on our YouTube. Lindy Collins posted it to the Facebook page for Centenary, and it's on the front page of our website too. So
that's
please don't miss it. It was pretty
Sunday.
good.
Yeah, it was a good service once you watch that version. September 13th, that's what we're talking about this past Sunday. And then this coming Sunday, that Brian Ralston guy is doing the message. Yeah, that guy. Because Pastor Tim will be otherwise occupied at the United Methodist Annual Conference meetings. Lucky him. So he will not be able to join us for the sermon. So I get to do it this week. Yay! So, yeah, hopefully we don't have to worry about any gremlins this coming Sunday.
I'm bummed you didn't go full Kermit on your yay.
Well, yeah, I get a little Kermity every now and then, but I try to restrain it. So, can I get it?
Recommendation.
To move on?
Yeah, let's do recommendations.
Recommendations, give it a try.
Ben, go first.
So Kristen and I have continuing through our rewatch of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We finished Avengers: Age of Ultron, and it was pretty okay. And we're very excited about. Oh no, actually, last night or 2 nights ago, recently we started the Ant-Man movie, and it's the Ant-Man movie. It's about what we remembered, but we're excited because in this phase we've got Civil War, which is pretty darn good. Guardians of the Galaxy, which is that's in my top 20 movies of all time, I think. And what's the other one? Oh, Thor Ragnarok. I'm so excited. Directed by Taika Waititi of New Zealand. He's a great director.
Is that a breakfast cereal? Thor of Red Rock or something?
Thor of Red
Does
Rock?
that have marshmallows in it? Or see, this is what it sounds like to Brian when Ben talks these movies, because my wife knows these, but Brian does not. So if you're joining me in that camp, then welcome. If you're in Ben's camp, then go watch those movies.
You know,
and
you're
enjoy.
right. I shouldn't be talking about such obscure, strange things. Please tell us
Hush.
about what new musical you're
Hush.
listening to.
No, I shall not.
A musical about the life of Helen Keller
Continue
called...
your recommendations. The story of Helen Keller. What would that be called, Ben? The Miracle Worker?
Oh, I already said it. Do you want me to say it again?
No.
Oh, no, it was a joke. Okay. Okay. So, Brian, what you been listening to?
So, yeah, I'm still listening to a lot of podcasts, a lot of audiobooks, surprise, surprise, because I have them on all the time. It's been amusing to us because with Kathy working at home, she talks a lot on the phone and does a lot of, computer calls and such. But she also talks to her husband as he's walking through the room frequently, and he doesn't know that because he's wearing headphones all the time. So, so I have been listening to just ongoing podcasts that kind of one called Unashamed and one called Unseminary, lots of uns, but they've been encouraging me spiritually, which has been kind of cool. And then I've also been back into a lot of sermons that I've listened to, a bunch from many different pastors, so I won't go into that as much. And then the books I've been listening to, again, I have like 5 books going at the same time. I have a silly fiction book, which is somewhat embarrassing because it's a British fiction writer that usually writes for a female audience, but yet I enjoy it. Sophie Kinsella is her name, so I had listened to one of her books recently, and then I also have back into my weird biographies. So I was listening to a biography about Dwight D. Eisenhower, which was excellent. So that's what I'm into. Weird, crazy Brian blend of things. And yes, I still am into musicals, but we don't need to go there because that's just even more embarrassing. So recommendations, that's all I have, I think.
I've got to give it a try for the week.
Oh, yeah, give it a try. That's what I want to hear.
So a few weeks ago, I think it was, I went down a little YouTube rabbit hole. And it's a very, very interesting thing. For any of you that have ever been called by a scam artist, and there's a moment in there where they're scaring you with something that seems like a real thing, I definitely recommend. I'm going to post a link to this in the description of this video, but there's several YouTubers who recreationally will go after scammers in different ways. And I find this valuable because you get to kind of see them breaking down the way a scammer goes about getting into your confidence, getting past your, your little subliminal defenses and all that. And it's just really interesting too. And some of these guys get really, really creative where they'll do the classic customer service screen sharing scam. And if you are not aware with this, sometimes you'll get like a pop-up window on your computer that says, oh, you've been hacked by malware. You need to call this number so that you can get help from a tech expert that will clean up your computer. And chances are the tech expert cleaning up your computer is the same person that bugged your computer in the first place to make that pop-up window come up. And what a lot of these guys do is they will get you to download a special software that'll let them take over your computer. And they're not going to be sneaky about it. They're telling you that that's what they're doing, so that once they have control of your computer, they can supposedly start doing some fixes on it, control it remotely so that they can clean it up. But what they're also doing is copying your files, copying your credit card information. Well, what these scammers do, or what the YouTubers do that I watched, is they have a virtual computer installed on their computer, and they're only giving the scammer access to that fake computer. And what they end up doing is they'll go onto the scammer's computer using that same connection.
They can trace it back
and start deleting their files, start looking up their personal information, and basically telling them, oh, you said you're Kevin from Connecticut, but I see that you're in this one little village in India, and how's this cafe that's across the street from your residence? And so the scammer will hang up and panic.
Retaliating against
and they just go really into depth. They're looking at the instant messages that this scammer shares with the other people in their organization, and they'll start asking them questions about that. It's really, really weird and crazy. So if that's all interesting to you, so the reason I recommend that is because when I watch these videos, it makes me not feel as scared in those situations, and it reminds me how clever scammers can be, so that I can be more on my guard in those situations where they're trying to gain your trust. And yeah, so.
And if you want a low-tech version of that, you can talk to my dad, because he actually retaliates.
Just hang up the phone and don't have a computer.
Yeah, he retaliates against the scammers directly and has kept them on the phone just for fun, to torture them, and has really enjoyed himself.
Knowing your dad, he probably made a friend that day.
He hasn't really tried because he's already against them because they're scam artists. So, but he has played with them quite a bit and messed with them quite a bit and made them crazy, which I find amusing. So does he. That's why he does it.
Okay.
So yeah, post that link. That's kind of cool. Check that out.
And that's recommendations for the day. And we're moving on now to a new segment we call Raise a Glass.
Raise a glass to times past.
They're going to fly a lot of flags half-mast.
So Ben is so Hamiltonian at times, as am I. And so we're influenced by that certain musical. But we wanted to raise a glass and some things we miss, some things we remember, and some things we long to return.
Things we miss and things we have missed as a result of just being in lockdown all this time.
Yes. this pandemic insanity. So mine is the first one this week. I miss gatherings. I miss Kathy and I hosting gatherings at our home. And I was reminded of this because about a year ago, we hosted a couple gatherings during September around my ordination time, and we really enjoyed having open houses and various gatherings. We would have done a lot of those with Pastor Tim and Gina here, and we met some new friends that are part of my Zoom Bible study, my Vine group on Wednesday night. We would have had them over by now with a few other families, but we can't because of this silly pandemic.
That's one of the ways you love connecting.
We do, and Kathy and I love using our home. One of the reasons I bought our home was it had a big enough space to entertain and host gatherings of 10 to 20 people pretty easily, and we love doing that, and we just haven't been able to do that. Kathy has acquired all these serving trays and plates and platters and all these great bowls and all these things that she really enjoys using, and they've been sitting on a shelf for like 7 months, and it's very difficult for both of us because we're not really, we don't like doing this pandemic thing, but nobody does. So raise a glass to gatherings. Someday we will have them again.
And I'm raising a glass today not to an activity I miss, but an event that I did miss. And it was the birth of my niece, Cora. Cora was born about, I think, 6 weeks, 2 months ago. At any rate, I wasn't allowed to be there, and I haven't been able to visit yet. And I would raise a glass to her right now and salute her because she is being born to two spectacular parents and just being born into a terrific family that a lot of us haven't met her yet, but we all are just madly in love with her. And I'm excited that she's in the world now. So
Indeed.
here's a
Raise a glass
to you,
of
Cora Barcelos.
And don't forget, it's a glass of water or non-alcoholic apple juice or something like that.
I was just raising a pane of glass.
Oh, okay. Oh, raising that. You're funny.
I don't know.
So thank you for joining us for that. Moving on
to trivia.
Trivia.
Okay, so last week's question was in the category of microbiology. The question, in a living cell, what organelle is responsible for the manufacture of chemical energy? And I was desperately hoping that our resident scientist listener, Randall Robinson, would answer, and he did. He gave us the correct answer of mitochondria. And Randall not only gave us the answer, he also gave us our next trivia question. So this is from Randall Robertson. If you've got the... Oh, no, sorry. He also had the bonus question. What is the primary structural difference between an animal cell and a plant cell? Randall correctly noted that it was a cell wall. Plant cells have a more rigid structure using a cell wall, whereas animal cells just have a membrane.
Randall, he's really smart. If you haven't met him, he's really cool and really smart.
Yeah.
Except for when he goes to
Raise
Subway.
a glass to him because I miss that guy.
When he goes to Subway, he's really weird, just so you know. Anyway.
He loves him.
Inside joke. Trivia question submitted by Randall.
Yes, so this listener source trivia question is, what is the name, and by the way, these are Randall's exact words, what is the name of the genius musician responsible for composing the famous 1970s song, Feels So Good? And a bonus question from me, what is his instrument called that he plays? 1970 song, Feels So Good, genius composer. Send us the answer to centenary1911@gmail.com.
Just so you know, Randall's far too young to even know the 70s, let alone that particular question. But
by the way, I've known Randall for about 10 years, and he's been obsessed with this artist for about 9 of those.
That's awesome.
Okay, moving on to stories.
Story time.
Story time, 'cause the lockdown is boring.
So I hijacked the story time once again because it's all about Brian, and Ben had a story, but I'm not letting him tell it.
Ralston Recollections, that's the rule.
Indeed. So once upon a time when I was a wee young child in Pennsylvania, so I was born, most of you know, I was born and about 13 months after I was born, I was diagnosed with cancer of the retinas, grew up visually impaired. So I had usable eyesight in my left eye only. But my parents, who are amazing parents, amazing people, they had a difference of opinion that was pretty significant relating to their child with this visual impairment. My mother was very protective and basically would prefer that I had been wrapped in bubble wrap as a child and never left out of the house, never let outside ever. And if I was, I'd be in bubble wrap from head to toe. My father was more balanced, I would say, and wanted me to push my boundaries and be a normal child as much as that was possible. My grandfather was really a major influence in my family. All these individuals, strong Christians, my grandfather especially, kind of pointed out that with my situation, they kind of needed to learn to do kind of a risk-reward analysis, almost a cost-benefit type analysis, where is this activity going to be worth the risk to Brian, like riding a bike. That's something that most kids get to do, and it was really important to my dad and my grandfather. I learned to ride a bike. Mom would have preferred I didn't learn to ride a bike because, riding a bike means you're endangering yourself and you can't see very well. So that was the constant reality of my childhood. And the story that I remember that was part of this was I went sled riding once upon a time. A lot, actually. That's a term that some of you may not know. Out west, y'all call it sledding. I don't know why, but sled riding is what I called it. And in my little town in Pennsylvania, when it snowed a lot, we did a lot of that. If we were adventurous, we'd go outside of the town to somebody's farm or whatever and have a grand old time with toboggans and inner tubes and all sorts of things. If we didn't have that much time or transportation was an issue, we would walk 6 or 7 blocks to a big hill in my hometown, Bouzevicky's Hill. If you ever want to go to Clymer, Pennsylvania, and go to Bouzevicky's Hill.
Is that a real name?
That is actually a family name. Bouzevicky. That was a family that lived, that owned this piece of property next to this hill. It was actually was supposed to be a street, but it was so steep they couldn't put the street up the further block. So this hill would actually end in a town street, small town, but you would actually, if you got going, you would go more than a block, and you would end up crossing a residential street. And that was always a bit of an adventure if you went that far. That was pretty far. That was unusually icy conditions or unusual snowy conditions if you went that far. But even just going down the main part of the hill was pretty exciting. The difficulty,
so go sledding, have a good time, but don't be too good at it, otherwise you get hit by a car.
My friend and I famously once got going so far and so fast that we weren't able to stop at the end of the hill, and we actually went down the street a little ways, and that was, he famously had gone underneath a truck one time, and it was, but the story I'm telling was the day that I famously, the steering mechanism on my little sled broke, the little ropey
like Cool Runnings
steering. Yeah, kind of like Cool Runnings. So there I am. I was probably 8 or 9 years old, flying down a hill, and the little ropey thing that steers the sled broke. And I remember it literally was dangling in my hands, and I suddenly went. And unfortunately, I was angled in such a way that I was heading straight for a telephone pole.
Oh, no.
Brian, and telephone poles have a magnetism that just has affected me all my life.
There's a long-standing rivalry.
Indeed. They're out to get me. So that particular day, steering mechanism broken, heading for a telephone pole, and you guessed it, I wasn't smart enough to roll off the sled. I, for some reason, thought I should stay on the sled. I'm laying on my stomach, so I'm literally going head first down this hill, and I just never crossed my mind to roll off the sled. I thought I had to stay on the sled. So I literally ran into a telephone pole head first, and I don't remember it because I was knocked unconscious.
Oh, wow.
And friends and parents on the scene were just scared to death because it looked horrific, and the sled became toothpicks, and there was nothing left of the sled, and thankfully they got to me pretty quick, and I was coming back to consciousness. They did take me to the hospital. I did stay overnight because I did have a concussion. But so the result of that episode was a 4 or 5 year battle between my parents because Mom kept using that incident as examples of why Brian shouldn't be allowed to.
Every time an argument got heated.
Yeah, and so that episode became the trigger point. But that's partially why, as a child, I sort of learned to do the risk-reward analysis. And my grandfather was great after that episode because he's like, that's why you have to learn. That didn't have anything to do with my disability. In his point, that was because Brian wasn't smart enough to roll off the sled. He didn't have recovery skills in the sense of, I need to learn to handle crisis better, that kind of thing. Obviously, he was very compassionate and worried about me too, but his point was, it didn't have anything to do with my disability. It had to do with the fact that I need to learn, to handle that moment a little better than I did as far as thinking through the crisis. So, but yeah, that's the story that for years was used in my family between my parents because my mom had a high priority on safety and a low priority on Brian being a normal kid and living life the way Brian wanted to. And so, yeah, in my later teens, I rebelled a lot and probably did things that were a little too risky and too crazy. And in my 20s, also a little bit. And as I got older, I learned to balance that out. And I learned that I had to overcome my disability, yes, but I could do it wisely. So the concept I've come up with is wise versus unwise because there's no such thing as safe. And so for me, that's always been the personal battle that I've struggled with. So Yeah, so that's an episode from my childhood where I got knocked out. Not the only time.
Main topic.
I guess we're moving on to main topic.
Sorry, I started the transition to the main topic there. Sorry.
Okay, so Brian told us that story today because it's especially germane to the focus of our primary discussion, which is, we're calling it the unicorn of safety. And it's something that's come up a lot in Brian's and my private discussions over the last few months. And Brian, I feel like you really want to take it from here.
As Ben has mentioned, I've been ranting about this to Ben. He was nice enough to say it's come up in our private conversations. I've been ranting about this for months because for me this has been a personal issue and an emotional issue. I think because I've dealt with this all my life. The balance between things being safe and living life the way you want to. During the pandemic, there's been a lot of focus on us, the government especially, or many other things that are going to help us keep safe from the coronavirus. And that's really good to a point and very necessary to a point. But for me, there always comes that reality that you have to acknowledge. There's no such thing as safe. It is a unicorn. Doesn't exist. For us to be 100% safe would mean not only you not ever leaving your home, but never letting anything into your home, and a whole bunch of restrictions that are just impossible in so many ways to live in a hermetically sealed environment where you have airlocks in and out of your home and things like that. That would be the only way to really even get close to safe, and even that is not possible. So for me, the whole concept of safe is not really even worth talking about. What I think we should be focusing on is wise and unwise, and cautious versus incautious perhaps. But yeah, so I think for me it's become a personal issue, what I get pretty riled up about because people can get pretty crazy about it. And I think we need to learn the whole principle of cost-benefit analysis, of risk-reward, of assessing the risk of something compared to the benefit that we get from it.
And I think Brian
don't think we're doing a good job of that.
Is a little less patient with this than some other people because he figured out this balance in his own life a few days probably after running into that telephone pole on a sled. Like, this is a decision that you've been making every day of your life since I've known you.
Yeah.
And I remember having a discussion with you years ago where you said, no, Ben, I get hurt every day.
Yeah.
But
so when you grow up with a disability, when you grow up with any kind of, and many other people have had this similar experience where it's not unique to me, but you realize there are just certain things that if you're going to choose to live life in the way you wish to live it, you're going to get hurt every now and then. You're going to get wounded. It's physically a reality for me because I run into things. I don't see very well. And at various points in my life, I've overcorrected. So like I mentioned earlier in the story, when I was in my late teens and 20s, I probably was a little bit too unwise. I did things that were probably not worth the risk. And I would regularly just not tell my parents about it until after the fact because I didn't want to deal with the drama that would have incurred. So I would probably went a little bit too far to the extreme. Then after losing the rest of my sight, I went through a period where I went too far to the caution end, and I would not even walk to work. I would not walk anywhere because I was frankly anxious about it. I was scared, and I didn't like that end of me where I got too cautious, and I never left my home unless I was with a sighted person, and I did not like that reality. So I've experienced both extremes where maybe for a season of my life, I put myself at risk and got injured in ways I didn't need to be. And then another season of my life, I was too careful and too cautious, and I lost out on a lot of living that I regret. So part of me getting a guide dog, part of me, the choices I made in the last 10 or 12 years have all been about, you know what, there is going to be a lot of reward for the risks I'm going to take. So even with a guide dog, I still run into things. Even today, as we speak, as we record this, I had an episode on a route today where I got hit in the face by an object. And so that happens even now.
And having these discussions with Brian has made me realize you, Brian, are faced with a choice every single day. 1 out of every 25 routes, you're going to get hit in the face with something that is left out on the sidewalk or a poorly trimmed tree branch. And you can make the decision, I'm going to accept that 1 out of every 25 times I'm going to get hit in the face. Or you can live your life indoors for the remainder of your days, and as far as you're concerned, there's nothing but tree branches at eye level for the entire route.
Right.
And so the tree branches are out there one way or the other. It's going to injure you one way or the other. You made that cost-benefit analysis to decide it is better to have 24 good routes and take a smash in the face on one of them rather than to have 0 good routes.
Right, exactly. Because the mental health benefits, the spiritual benefits, the physical benefits, all those things are well worth it to me. And I think if we learn to do that kind of practice in a lot of things, and we in some ways we've all done this to a point. Relationships are a risk to some extent. When you open yourself up and you share your life with somebody else, you're kind of taking a risk. But we've kind of analyzed that. We've learned, okay, I can trust this person, and so I'm willing to do that. Other people have not made that same choice. They've chosen not to open themselves up and have chosen to be alone, and so on with families, with relationships, with all sorts of things. We do this on a regular basis, but we need to be more intentional about it, especially now during this pandemic, because I think we've gone too far to one extreme now where we're paying some costs that we maybe don't want to pay because we're not talking about it. There's so many things out there that we're not talking about. We're not doing this risk reward cost-benefit analysis.
And let's go ahead and mention what we are not suggesting you do. We are not saying you stop wearing a mask.
No.
We are not saying you shake hands with every single person at the grocery store, or if somebody's sneezing, you stand under it like it's a refreshing mister on a hot day. No, we're not suggesting that at all. Please do take the coronavirus seriously. However, Brian, go ahead.
There's a path of moderation. There's a path of being a moderate response instead of the two extremes. I think we often think it has to be one or the other. And the reality is, a lot of times there's a middle course. There's a moderate region within the two extremes that you don't have to go to the two extremes. There's so many out there in our world are forcing you to choose between these two polar opposite extremes and saying you're either this or you're that. There's nothing in between. And that's not the reality. With so many things, there is a moderate course. With this, I think with the pandemic, you can be wise and take reasonable precautions and reasonable accommodations, like wearing a mask, like limiting your social gatherings. All those are very, very wise things to do. But you don't need to go to the extremes that I think sometimes we're going. And if you remember this, at the beginning of this pandemic, a lot of us went to some crazy extremes. I remember myself wiping down packages and different things that I brought into my home because we didn't know how the virus was spread. And so I remember doing some research and saying, is this legit? Do I need to take this
And we also kind of struck a bargain. We're going to accept these extreme measures for 2 weeks.
Yes.
2 weeks was kind of the obligatory time period that had been established all over the place. None of us imagined at the time that we'd still be in lockdown 6 months later. And we were willing to accept these changes, but for a lot of organizations and in a lot of households, they never really renegotiated the terms of that to find a more moderate approach. And one community that suffered greatly from this is the senior community.
Yes.
And Brian, are you able to share that little line from the conversation you had earlier?
So yes, just today, and I've heard this throughout the pandemic, but I had hoped it was getting better. But just today I talked with a senior, a very honored and elderly gentleman in our congregation who, in his 90s, said to me that in his care facility where he lives, he feels like a prisoner because the restrictions are so severe and so limiting that, not only can he not go out, but he really can't even have people come into his apartment. And there's very, very severe restrictions to keep him safe. And the goal is to keep him safe and to keep all the residents safe. And that understandably sounds like a great goal. But I think just far too often we don't understand the quality of life is sacrificed so much so that in this case, he said he's really struggling because he feels like a prisoner. And he didn't do anything wrong. And it's not like he deserves to be a prisoner. He committed no crimes. He doesn't deserve to lose all of his freedoms and all of his quality of life. And so that's not the first person I've heard that from, sadly. And I think that population, those who are maybe not as technologically connected and not as able to make adjustments, and they're not as resilient as maybe younger folks are, that's been a huge hit that we're not talking about. Our seniors who have lost so much of their quality of life.
And they're not the only group that's lost a great deal of their quality of life. I mean, the alternate discussion, or the title we considered for this main topic, was Safety the Big White Whale, because there is a little bit of Captain Ahab syndrome going on here, where we are pursuing this ideal of safety so rapidly that we're not really, in a lot of situations, taking full analysis of what it's costing us. And
right.
Brian, you mentioned yesterday the mental health of young people.
Yeah, so the mental health of children and young adults and youth is just, it's becoming crisis levels. There's a whole nother pandemic that's happening that no one's talking about, which is the severe effect this all is having on children as young as preschool and elementary school aged, all the way up to college students, because this has been traumatic on them. They lost their lives in many ways. They lost their social lives, their input from others. They lost what it's like to be taught in person from a teacher.
And what I understand, the whole distance learning situation for them is extremely stressful.
Yes.
Like there's just so much tension, and they can't leave.
So we're endangering the mental health of young ones that we don't know what the consequences could be later, where the suicide rate has spiked significantly, especially among younger people. It was already high to begin with, and this has made it worse. The divorce rate has spiked quite a bit. The addictions, opioid addiction as well as many other addictions. So it's a mental health crisis that's developing, not just in the elderly and the young, but in everyone in between. As you adults know, as you try to juggle working from home maybe and parenting your distance learning children and handling maybe the loved ones you can't even contact anymore or physically go see anymore, there's so much out there that we don't talk about because all we're focused on is let's pursue the great white whale of safety. We're going to keep everybody safe, and there you go. For Christians, I think there's an interesting angle for Christians because I think safety, even more so for Christians, should not be our goal, should not be our end game. Because for a Christian, you have security that goes beyond this world. You have a future reality that goes beyond anything you could possibly imagine. And so what you see in the scriptures so often is Jesus encouraging his followers to go and to understand this world will bring suffering, this world will bring persecution, and there will be difficult times. But you don't need to insulate yourself or try to make yourself bulletproof from that because this world is not your home.
He didn't treat his followers like they were made of glass, and he certainly didn't want them to guard their own fragile lives as if that was the most precious and valuable thing in their possession.
Yeah.
Because it's really not.
Right, exactly. His whole point was this life is a gift, but you need to invest it well and invest it wisely because it is not yours. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs first and foremost to God. And so invest it wisely because your time, your resources, your gifts, all of those things, they belong to God. So if you think of it in that terms, you have a great security that even if something happens to you, and heaven forbid, but even if you get sick or even if you're persecuted for your faith and you're martyred, all those kind of things, Jesus is saying, this is not the end. This is not something you have to worry about. And the whole promise in Scripture is nothing can separate you from the love of God that's in Jesus Christ. So suffering or illness or ailments or...
Yeah, there's quite a list there.
It's a huge list. And what Jesus is reminding us is that's a security that we can kind of live on, and thus it doesn't give us license to take extra risk. It's not saying you have a death wish and you need to go out and put yourself directly in harm's way intentionally, but he's saying you got to understand this is a call to go and to understand that suffering is going to happen and trials are going to come, but that shouldn't be a reason for you to stay home and just insulate yourself and protect yourself. So again, a moderate course, not saying you have to go flying in the face of death, but also not necessarily saying you should stay home and never leave.
Please buckle your seatbelt.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you can still drive your car.
Yes, you should and still should go and drive your car and be out in the world. Again, we're supposed to be in the world, not of the world, but in the world. That doesn't mean, walling yourself away for your own safety and personal comfort. I think that's where we Christians sometimes get it wrong, is we build metaphorical but also actual physical compounds where we want to keep ourselves safe and secure from that big bad world out there. And that's not always helpful for us, especially during this pandemic time. I think safety becomes the highest priority, and that's really not a biblical perspective.
And it's not reasonable.
Yes.
And it's not without cost.
Yes. That's I think one of the things I've been most irritated by is we think of it as when you read different things and you hear different things, it's like, oh, of course this is what we have to do, and that no one ever talks about the cost. No one ever assesses the damage. No one does the risk-reward analysis. The cost-benefit analysis is never done because, again, safety becomes, and it's partially because we didn't plan for this.
We were not ready for this.
We're not ready for this on any level. The church, the government, nobody was ready for this. And so we've never adjusted to say, this is a long-term marathon. This is a long-term battle. So let's do a risk-reward analysis and see what we're willing to risk to make sure we continue to have the benefits we need for mental health, for physical health, for spiritual health. We didn't even get into it, but there's a whole segment of society that people are not being diagnosed for cancer or heart issues or other medical issues because they're afraid to go to the doctor. They're afraid to go to the hospitals because they're afraid of getting coronavirus. And I'm sorry, but coronavirus for the majority of people is way less dangerous than cancer or heart disease. So
I think there's a lot of people walking it off right now.
Yeah. So we just wanted to talk about all this to get you to think about all this and to start just kind of, we don't have any major, fixes or major solutions. Obviously, I think one of the things I've had to learn to do in this pandemic is limit myself to what I can do in this day and focus on the choices that I have and the things that I can control and be able to let go of all those things I cannot control or cannot decide on my own. So we don't want you to get too overwhelmed by this, but we do want you to, in your own personal life, do a cost-benefit analysis, do a risk-reward, and make sure you're understanding your choices need to be intentional and your choices matter.
And so, they need to be informed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Please. So don't go off the rails on either extreme, and we just want you to be praying about it and asking God to guide you and making sure that you are trying to find that moderate position where we handle this pandemic in a responsible, wise way, and don't buy into the crazy.
One last word before we go.
So closing thoughts, closing reminders. I only have one, and that's to encourage you to be tuning in to what we're trying to provide for you here at Centenary, be it the TGIF or the various resources that Ben works so hard to put on the YouTube, on the website,
shucks.
and all the Facebook and all those things. And then, tune in this weekend as we preach. We're going to be talking about courage, and I think a necessary thing for us all right now is courage. And so we want you to stay connected to our church family. Please email us. We didn't mention that earlier, but contact us, communicate with us, and if you need anything that we can help with, please feel free to ask. And
by the way,
stay in touch.
Read Joshua chapter 1, verses 1 through 9 to get some context for this weekend's message from our very own Brian Ralston.
Oh, that guy. Keep your expectations low. That's all I have to say. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
For now.